Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving deep into the architecture of a restless mind, and we're going to uncover the hidden truth behind your anxiety. Look, if you've ever felt like your brain is just this motor that absolutely will not shut off, you're definitely in the right place. We're going to break down the exact mechanisms of why your mind races so much. And honestly, I promise you, what we find is going to completely shift the way you view your own thoughts.
Okay, so let's set the scene. You know the feeling. It's 2 a.m., the house is completely silent, but your mind is running like a roaring engine. Physically, you're just totally exhausted, but mentally, it feels like you're running a marathon. You haven't done any heavy lifting today, yet somehow you feel completely and utterly drained.
You're lying there in bed, staring at the ceiling, trapped in this agonizing loop. You might literally be replaying a 5-minute conversation from 3 years ago, obsessing over some tiny, insignificant detail. Or maybe you're drafting a highly detailed, bulletproof mental response to an argument that hasn't even happened yet. Your brain simply refuses to stop asking that terrifying, open-ended question, what if?
Now, there's a really fascinating psychological paradox here. We so often think of anxiety or overthinking as a weakness, right? But in reality, some of the most emotionally aware, highly intelligent people you will ever meet are also the ones who are just utterly exhausted. And they aren't exhausted from their daily tasks. They are exhausted from the sheer volume of their own thoughts. It's wild, because the very cognitive habit that makes someone so careful and empathetic is the exact same habit that quietly drains all their energy.
Well, psychologists actually have a specific term for this. Researchers at Yale and the University of Michigan call this mental trap maladaptive rumination. I know it sounds super academic, but it basically just means your mind is frantically chewing on problems that it can't actually swallow. And it happens because your brain is exceptionally good at pattern recognition. It's constantly scanning, processing, looking for meaning. So the problem isn't your intelligence at all. It's just that your internal system never gets the signal to hit the brakes.
But here's the thing, not all overthinking is created equal. On one hand, we've got reflective rumination. This is when you turn inward to understand yourself and make sense of the world. When it's balanced, this is literally a superpower of self-awareness and high emotional intelligence. But then we have brooding rumination. And this is the monster. This is that passive, distressing pattern of just dwelling on problems without ever actually moving toward a resolution. This is the side that steals your sleep and totally paralyzes your daily decisions.
And this brooding pattern, it doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It's deeply driven by what we call uncertainty intolerance. It's this intense psychological inability to handle the unknown. When you're faced with a gray area in life, your mind desperately seeks answers. Your brain actually mistakenly believes that worrying about a situation creates this sort of shield of safety. It's like your mind is telling you, hey, if I can just figure out every possible angle here, I won't get hurt.
This whole thing builds into a really dangerous psychological trap known as catastrophizing. You encounter an unknown situation. Say, your boss sends you a super vague email that just says, we need to talk. Next thing you know, you're overanalyzing every single interaction you've had this entire week. And then, you instantly jump to the absolute worst-case scenario. I'm getting fired, I'm going to lose my house, my life is completely over. Your mind literally goes from zero to absolute disaster in milliseconds.
Now, the absolute trickiest part about this whole cycle is that your brain is actively lying to you. Because all this thinking feels so intense and productive, you suffer from what cognitive psychologists call the illusion of mental progress. You genuinely feel like you're solving a problem, but in reality, you aren't moving forward at all. You're just sweating it out on a mental treadmill.
To really grasp why this happens, we need to look under the hood at your neurology. Your prefrontal cortex is the area of your brain responsible for planning and analysis. Well, for an overthinker, this region stays highly active even when you're supposed to be relaxing on the couch. Meanwhile, your default mode network, which is basically your brain's background processing system, just keeps generating this endless internal monologue. The result? Your brain never actually powers down. It's this always online system, constantly auditing the world around you and drafting backup plans.
Okay, get ready, because here is the most mind-blowing part of this entire cycle. When you run through a scenario and construct these elaborate mental arguments, your brain actually releases small amounts of dopamine. Yes, the reward chemical. You are literally being chemically rewarded just for the sheer act of thinking, even if you never actually find an answer. This is exactly why telling an overthinker to just stop thinking is completely useless. Your brain literally has a built-in chemical incentive to keep the loop going.
So why is your brain wired this way in the first place?
Well, for a lot of people, this exhausting habit actually began really early in life. If you grew up in a household where mood shifted without warning, or maybe where a minor mistake had huge, outsized consequences, your young brain learned to adapt. By adolescence, anticipating everything became this brilliant, highly logical survival strategy. Because, think about it, if you could predict what was coming, you could protect yourself. And by adulthood, this just became your fixed cognitive adaptation. It's your default operating system.
I really want you to let this sink in for a second. Your overthinking is not a personality defect. It is absolutely not a sign of instability or weakness. It's an incredibly smart, highly active nervous system trying its hardest to keep you safe in a world that once felt very unpredictable. Your brain is just doing exactly what it was trained to do.
And this actually leads us to a massive revelation that completely changes how we look at anxiety. It was published in the journal Psychological Science back in 2013.
So this 2013 study found that people who ruminate heavily also score significantly higher in cognitive empathy. Now, cognitive empathy is this remarkable ability to deeply understand the emotional texture of a room. It means you're incredibly sensitive to social nuance and exactly how your words land with other people. So this exhausting curse of overthinking, it's actually tied directly to a profound social superpower. The very engine that tires you out is exactly what makes you so remarkably perceptive.
But of course, that superpower comes with a pretty heavy tax. We call this the overthinker's tension. On one side, you've got high perception. You notice absolutely everything. But on the other side, you have low resolution. Because you see so many different angles and so many possibilities, finding actual clarity becomes harder and harder. Perception without resolution is just incredibly exhausting. You're constantly feeling the weight of a dozen different outcomes all at once.
So how do we actually break this cycle? Therapists use this really powerful technique called cognitive diffusion. The goal here isn't to magically stop your thoughts, that's impossible, but to change your relationship with them. Notice the difference here. When you're in a fused state, you think, this situation is dangerous and I absolutely need to figure it out right now. That pulls you right into the anxiety spiral. But in a diffused state, you shift to, oh, my brain is just generating a concern right now. That subtle shift, it's everything. It gives you a tiny fraction of distance. You suddenly become an observer of your thoughts rather than a hostage to them.
Ultimately, we have to realize a quiet truth that psychology just keeps circling back to. The mind simply cannot think its way out of every problem. Some things just have to be felt, decided on, or honestly, simply released. Chronic worrying is, at its core, merely a tragic, exhausting attempt to control an uncontrollable future. And once we finally accept that the future cannot be controlled by just thinking harder about it, that's when we can start to let go.
The challenge of this explainer, and the big takeaway I really want to leave you with today, isn't to declare war on your brain. It's not to force your mind into silence. It's to understand it, defuse from those spinning thought loops, and recognize that your hypervigilance has already done its job. The real question is, how will you gently teach your brilliant, exhausted mind that it is finally safe enough to rest? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Take a breath, step off that mental treadmill, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.